Thanks everyone for joining in today. We are going to get started right away so that we have time to cover everything that we need to cover. So bear with me 1 second here while I share out my desktop. All right. You should be able to see my desktop at this point. Couple of things to talk about that I kind of want to just set the stage as we begin. Let me hide this. The objective for today is we're going to build the intersection and the median crossover that you see on the screen. So this is where we're going to go over the next hour. So feel free, as before, to always ask questions. And if there's a team of Bentley colleagues ready to answer those behind the scenes, as well as the Q&A at the end. But this is what we're going to construct. Again, we're going to model the intersection you see and the median crossover as well. The general agenda you see here on the screen. Let me make this point as we get started. Everything that we do today, all of the tools that we work through, all of the workflows or the techniques, the things that we do are really applicable to both intersections or driveways. The goal really here is to really help you understand how that you can take advantage of a specific set of tools for designing and modeling, whether that's an intersection, whether it's a driveway, or you're going to even see those tools used in a way to model a median crossover. So the basic agenda here, and I kind of like to break this down into generic or generalized pieces. We're going to create the 2D geometry for our intersection. From that, once we have that established, we're going to modify the roadway corridor. We'll remove the end conditions in the area of the intersection, along with modifying how the intersection or how the corridor is going to interact with the intersection at the radiuses. And then after the 2D is created, we're going to assign vertical definition to that 2D geometry. And I'll explain more what I mean when I say assign vertical definition to the 2D geometry. One thing in OpenRoads Designer that's important to begin to think about and understand is that when we say geometry, that could mean station geometry, meaning main lines and vertical alignments, but that geometry could also mean edges of pavements, flow lines of ditches, back of curbs, shoulders, other things as well, okay? So that's kind of where I'm using the term geometry. So we'll lay out the 2D geometry, make modifications to the roadway corridor, then we'll vertically define our 2D geometry by using profiles and vertical geometry tools. Then we're going to actually build the intersection model, which will consist of the pavement section. Of course, for the pavement section, we'll create a terrain and use surface templates. Then we're going to model the shoulders and the side slopes around it. From there, after modeling the intersection, we'll move over into the median crossover area of the roadway corridor, and we'll go through that process too in a little more streamlined fashion. But we're going to go ahead and build that as well. Okay, so that's our basic agenda. So let's get started. All right, there are in your data set, I have opened up the file Intersection County Road 421, and you can see that here on the screen, just as we've done in prior sessions. What you see on the screen is the compilation of the data we've built up to this point. The topo's there, the corridor's there, the proposed layout, and so forth are all there. And again, I've just opened that file up directly from MicroStation or for OpenRoads Designer, and just to save time to get started. Okay, reference files are all attached. You can see those here on the screen. We could see those in the references as well. We'll look at those in just a second. So we're in the file County Road 421, Intersection County Road 421. There's nothing in this file. Everything you see here is represented by reference files. This is where we're going to lay out and model our intersection and our median crossover. So to begin, notice I'm in a 2D file, and we've talked about this in previous sessions, so I won't go into too much depth with it. But I'm in a 2D file. My terrain model is here, although it's not active. So I'm going to select the terrain model graphically, wait for the pop-up menu I'm going to hover over that and wait for the menu to pop up, and I'll set the terrain model active. Now, setting that terrain model active did some things behind the scenes. And before I get started into the actual workflow, I simply want to just activate that terrain, and I want to open up some additional views. So again, using the right-click menu, and you could do this more manually if you wanted to, but off the right-click menu, I can just open up here the three-dimensional view on the right-hand side, and you see the two-dimensional view on the left-hand side. So we want to be able to see both and interact with both so that we can understand what we're doing as we go through the workflow. I'm just going to change the views again, and just because I want to clean up this just a little bit or simplify the view. So I'm going to turn off a couple of things here. Again, this is the area we'll be working, and I'm going to simplify the view. Then I'm going to go to File and Save Settings so that that display set up the way I like it. Okay. Now, one thing I'm going to do as well, if we go back, I'm going to click on View 2, and we'll go look at the references. Let's look at the reference files that are attached. As I mentioned before, these are the files that have been created previously through the course of these sessions, okay? The only difference would be this driveways file, which is included today for this specific session, okay? I'm going to turn on, I'll select this file, Intersection, County Road 421, the model's default 3D, and I'm going to turn that off. Just to, again, it'll save me some visual, it'll just simplify my view going forward, right? So we'll turn that off. And now we want to get started. So let's begin. Our first step is to lay out the two-dimensional geometry for this particular intersection. And you'll see here where we're located. We're north of the creek crossing where the bridge is going to be, and this is an existing intersection. And again, we're going to modify this as we widen and work on our mainline corridor. So we're going to begin using, first of all, the geometry tools. The baseline for the intersecting road is here. You can see it there on the screen. Again, this was pre-created just to save us a little time. And now we're going to work on building the edge of pavement features for our intersection. So I'm going to go to the Geometry tab. I'm going to focus in the horizontal tools here in this area. And we're going to use a series of these tools over and over again, but we're going to use them to accomplish certain tasks. So the first thing I want to do is from this baseline, I'm going to lay out, first of all, the edge of pavement along this tangent section. So I'll go here. I'm going to grab under Offsets and Tapers. I'm going to use this command Single Offset Partial. And then the dialog box will open, but I'm going to follow the prompts on the screen, okay? So select the element. So I'll select the baseline from which I want to create the offsets. And then I'll follow through and offset or input the information. Now, one thing here you'll notice, and I'm going to back up a step just to clarify. So as I begin to lay out these graphics, you'll notice that that line is gray. Now, there's one thing I didn't do, okay? I made a mistake. So I'm going to click the Escape key. I'm going to go back here, turn on the feature definition lock, and I'm going to select the feature definition that I want to be applied to all of these edge of pavement features that I'm going to open up, that I'm going to create as I'm going through this workflow, okay? So we'll go back. Again, that was just a simple mistake. It happens all the time. But I want to activate that feature definition so that I get the proper properties, the proper display properties, as I'm laying all this out. So we'll go back. We'll use the same command, Single Offset Partial, select the baseline from which we're going to offset, and now you'll notice the line is blue, so this is using the attribution for our feature definition. We want the offset to be 12, which is keyed in there. I could make that something different if I wanted. We're going to leave it at 12. Push the Tab key to lock it, and you'll notice there's a left and right arrow. If I push the left arrow or the right arrow, I'm actually going to pick the beginning point along my main line, or my stationing along that secondary road center line where I want to begin this offset. So I'm just going to pull this down here, and I'm data pointing, and then I'm going to move back. Now you'll notice that the distance is locked in at station 1 plus 50, and that's I can push the end key, that's END, the end key, if I want to have a rubber banding line. So I can select that graphically, or I can key in a specific value, such as in this case 150, and push the Tab key, and that will lock that value. Okay? So this is the initial edge of pavement along that secondary road center line. I'll data point to accept it. I'm actually going to push the down arrow because I want to mirror this element. I want to create both edges of pavement at the same time. So I'll data point, to create both edges of pavement at the same time. Now, those edges of pavement both have a relationship back to this center line from which they were created, and you can see those on the screen. Another thing I need to do at this point as we zoom in here, you'll notice that my initial offset of 12 doesn't meet the existing edge of pavement location. So I'm going to make a quick modification to my proposed edge of pavement. You'll notice they are ruled. It knows it's 12 feet from the baseline, but I'm actually going to just graphically move that. And there's a couple of things I could do to snap it, but I'm just going to move it over, snap it onto the existing edge of pavement feature inside the topo and data point. And I'll do that for the other side as well. And it's just a matter now of grabbing those little cursor prompts along the point there. So I'm not moving it forward any station. I'm just moving it left and right. And again, grab the snap and locate that into the existing edge of pavement. So we've got the beginnings of our edge of pavement laid out. Now we need to think about our transition area, our horizontal arc that will be created between that edge of pavement that we just created and our proposed edge of pavement of our roadway corridor. So I'm going to go into the reference files. I just want to simplify the view a little bit. So I'm going to turn off the proposed layout file. And now you can actually see the line strings for what is in our proposed corridor. So here we see the edge of pavement feature represented in plan view. And I want to create an arc between that edge of pavement feature and then my freshly created secondary road edge of pavement. So I'll go back into the geometry tools, back into the horizontal geometry tools. And here I'm going to go under the arcs menu. I'll select arc between elements, and I'm going to create just a simple arc in this case. There are other options here. You'll notice there are other types of arcs that we could create in this section. So it's the same process depending on what you want for that particular geometric layout. I'm going to place just a straightforward, simple arc. The radius has been, well, we'll use 50 feet. And again, I'm following the prompt. The left, or the first element I'll select will be the left edge of pavement of my proposed corridor. And then the second element would be, let me try that again. So let's select the edge of pavement and select my edge of pavement along my secondary road. And now you can see the visual display of a 50-foot radius. I haven't accepted it, but you can see it there. I could unlock that radius again and modify that, or I can key in the value. I'm going to hold 50 feet as my value. Again, if you want to unlock that, push the end key. So I'll data point to accept that, leave the trim extend option to both, and now we have now created that arc on the western side, well, the northern western side of the intersection. Now we're going to follow the same step for the other side of the intersection. We're going to use the same properties. So again, I'll select the edge of pavement along the mainline corridor and the edge of pavement along the secondary road. We see, again, the result that will be created. I'll data point, I'll trim and extend both the beginning and the ending of the element and accept that. And so now we can take a look. We can see those elements, they've been created inside, or the two-dimensional edge of pavement features have been created. Now we're going to continue working here and recognizing ultimately where I'm going here is I am building the boundary elements. Those edge of pavement features will also be used as boundary elements for a pavement terrain. So in recognizing that, I'm going to again use the geometry tools. I'm going to place just a straight geometric line, and I'm actually going to snap that from the edge of pavement. It doesn't matter if you go left or right, right to left, and snap that again to the opposite side. Again, ultimately here I'm building a terrain, and this line represents my match line with the existing roadway, both horizontally and vertically. Okay, so this will be a boundary element in my terrain that gets created as we work toward this. Okay, now we have the same situation as we get down, as we get to the area where the intersection is going to tie into the proposed corridor. again, I need to think in terms of terrain modeling. So I need another horizontal element, which will, again, have vertical definition along that area where my intersection ties to my roadway corridor. So again, I'm going to place another line between points. I'm going to select, or I'm going to snap that to the arc as it intersects along the edge of pavement of the corridor. And I'm snapping these elements, and I can hover over that now and select it. You'll notice that there is a snap rule assigned to it. Okay, so these elements are ruled together. All right, and now let me turn off the corridor graphic, just again to give us a little more simplified view of where we are and what we have done. Okay, so at this point, let's pull this down here. We've laid out, again, the intersection, the edge of pavement elements along the intersection, and we've placed what would be considered additional boundary elements, knowing that this is going to be the pavement terrain surface, first of all, okay? So we're going to use these as, again, boundary elements to create the pavement. Now, all of this data is modifiable and editable, okay? So if I don't like 50 feet for the radius, that can be modified now. It can actually be modified later, and we'll look at doing that as we go down or downstream as we kind of get into this a little farther, okay? All right, so we've got the horizontal definition or the horizontal layout, okay, a very simplified layout of our intersection at this point, okay? Now, we're going to kind of take the next step. How do we interact with this data? How do we make modifications? So at this point, it's laid out. We've got the horizontal elements, but you'll note I need to do some work on the roadway corridor. I still have side slopes and a shoulder inside my model that I need to do something with those. How do I eliminate those? And in the area of the median crossover, which you can see here, I also need to remove that median ditch so that, again, I can recreate the actual median crossover in the model rather than that median ditch which is being created from the template. So our next step, we're going to do a couple of things, okay? The first is we're going to go and look into the layout file. And let me turn this back on just for a visual. We're going to go look at the layout file first of all. And there's a key point here I want to show you before that leads into modifying the corridor. So let's change files and let's go look at the file in geometry, Highway 72 proposed layout. Now this file contains, again, the geometric layout for the crossovers, the width of the pavement, all those types of things that we defined, again, in earlier sessions. It was kind of the basis from which we've been working. In this file, we have added in some additional graphics, some match line graphics. Now these match line graphics, you'll notice they actually appear at certain areas. And those areas are where driveways or intersections occur along our roadway corridor. Now, why have we placed those into our file? Now, those match lines will be used as a reference into the corridor to remove the end conditions, and I'll show you that in 1 second. But let's take a look at the specific match line for our intersection. So I'm in the file that contains that. I want to reference back, and I want to see my geometric layout for my intersection. So I'm going to reference in my intersection file. And I'm referencing this in really so that I can get a clear picture of how this match line interacts with my actual intersection. And you'll notice that this match line was drawn previously, and it doesn't necessarily match what my intersection is. Now, creating this match line in the real process, you may create the intersection first, then come in and create the match line, and that's fine. The point here is that this match line, I'm just going to key this in or specify this based off of the location of the actual width of the intersection. So I want this to match the width of the intersection, okay? And so again, I'm really just checking this. This is just a check and a quick data point to make sure that it matches, okay? Now, the key here to take away is, number one, that match line exists, and it exists in this layout file. I'm actually going to detach this. Don't worry about that. I know I tried to rule it. That's fine. I don't want to clog it up with graphics at this point. So my point of removing that. And now we see the match line, and it exists in that file at the width of the intersection. Now I want to actually go modify the corridor based off that match line. So I'm going to browse back and open up into the corridor folder and open up my corridor file, which you see here. And I'm going to, once this is open, we're going to add that match line graphic as an external reference into our corridor. Okay, so here's what we'll do. We'll see the match line. So this file has those same files compiled. We see proposed layout is here. They're all referenced together. So I can access that specific match line graphic. Now, that match line is going to interact with the roadway template. So let me give you a bit of a background how this is going to work. So I'm going to open up the template being used in the roadway corridor. And I'll give you kind of an explanation of how this happens. So we've now opened up the template. Again, this is the template being used along the length of the roadway corridor. And I want you to notice this particular point. And if I move this point, if I modify this point just slightly to the left, notice what happens to the shoulder and the end conditions on that side of the road. If this goes back to the center line or to the right, it reappears, and then it disappears if this point is moved any direction or any slightly to the left. Okay, and now this is the functionality in this template that we're going to use to remove those end conditions. Okay, now this happens because this particular point has a feature constraint on it. Notice that it matches the feature definition of the line in our file. Okay, so this is really the key to how this is about to work. Okay, so that point is looking for a feature definition called match line, which is the same feature definition assigned to our driveway entrance line string. And then a display rule actually turns off those elements if it finds it. All right, so that's kind of that explanation behind the scenes, how this is going to work. Now, to activate that, we're going to select the roadway corridor itself. We're going to add that line, that match line string as a corridor reference. So I'll select that button. I'll go out, select the element itself, and then right-click. And then the corridor is going to reprocess now that that element's been added as a reference into that file or into that corridor. And you'll see what the results are. So based off of nothing more than that line with a specific feature definition and the template controlling and looking for that feature definition, we've now turned off that area where our intersection is going to be. Okay. Now, again, just to sync things up a little bit, I'm going to quickly reference in our intersection file. Again, just to kind of build consistency with how we are putting the parts together. So we'll reference back the intersection. And now we can graphically see the intersection. The point here I want to make is you'll notice now I need to refine my template drops a little. I need to add in some additional template drops as I get to this point of where my arc begins. I can do that by using key stations. So I'll select the corridor once more and select the key station button. Now I don't want this to occur past where the intersection begins. I want this to occur slightly before. You could mark this off as 100th before the station if you want. It's not super specific, but you want it to be slightly before this point, okay? I want one final template drop before I get to that point, and you'll see how this is going to tie the model together as we go through this. So I'll add in that key station. You'll notice that it adds in an additional template drop, which again, it adds a continuation of my shoulder. I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. Zoom in just a little. Again, I know the boundary of my intersection is there, 521, 69, 78. I could key this in, or I could just move over slightly. Again, I'm just moving over a tenth at this point, maybe even a 500ths, and I'm data pointing. I just want to get an additional template drop so that I get a continuation of that shoulder and side slope into the area where my intersection shoulder and side slopes are going to begin. Okay? So we've modified the corridor for our intersection. Now we need to modify the corridor while we're here for this area for the median crossover. Now, the way we're going to do this, Scott, when he modeled this corridor, recognizing those key locations along the corridor where modifications were going to have to be made, he made an additional template drop in the area of our crossover, knowing we're going to have to come back and edit that specifically. So using that, I'm going to edit the specific template drop, and you'll see it occurs in the area where the crossover is located. So I'm going to select that graphic, edit the template drop just through that area. And really all I want to do is simply remove the inside shoulder and the median side slopes through that area. So I'll delete those, say OK to that, and then we'll see the model or the corridor reprocess. And we'll see that modification being made. So at this point, basically, we've modified the corridor. We have, again, removed the pieces that we don't need out of the corridor model, and we're going to replace them with the crossover, and we're going to replace them with the intersection model that we're building right now. Okay? So we've taken care of modifications to the corridor. Let's move back into our intersection file and begin to define the verticals with our intersection. So I'm going to move back into our intersection file. Again, this file is where we're actually laying out the intersection, where we're defining the vertical, where we're going to create the model for this intersection. And so now we're back into that file that we began in. You'll notice now we can see the changes that have been made to the corridor. And now we're going to begin now to build up this intersection. Okay? Now, in the methodology that I'm showing you, let me kind of explain here. I'm really showing you the detailed process for being able to absolutely and definitively control the elements within your model. Okay? There are other methods that we could use here, but I'm really giving you a look at the technology and the tools and the workflow and the relational kind of information and the rules and relationships behind the scenes that allow you to model, a lot of stuff, virtually anything at this point, okay? You may have seen civil cells or something being placed at different times. This is showing you all of the technology underneath the hood of a civil cell, okay? So the point here really is to show you, again, exactly how to do this using explicit elements and designing exactly the way you want to. All right, so we've got the 2Ds created. Now it's time to define the vertical for those elements. Now, how do we build the edge of pavement features? How do we define the vertical for our intersection? Now, as I mentioned before, the baseline for this secondary road's been created. We've used the horizontal of that baseline already to create the horizontal edges of pavement. The vertical's been created as well. You see it here in the 3D, okay? Or we'll do this quite a bit. I'll go ahead off that element and I'll open up the profile, because now we're shifting gears into thinking about the profile of these elements, or like I said, sometimes I'll call it the vertical definition of these elements, okay? All right. So let's start looking at that. Let's open up, let's go here and open up the profile for the edge of pavement first of all, okay? So we can see this as it's happening. So right now, as we look along this edge of pavement section, this tangent, we can see the terrain model underneath, but we want to add in verticals for this edge and this edge. To do that, what I'm going to do is, if we go to the geometry tools, the cross slope on this road is a typical 2%, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the vertical tools. I'm going to use, under this drop down, I'm going to use profile by variable slope from element, okay? Now what this does is it takes a baseline element and then it projects a defined cross slope. In this case, we can vary that cross slope, and it allows us to do that from the baseline out to another element and set a profile on it, and that's what we're going to do. I'm varying this because I want to be able to change it from beginning to end. So I'll follow the prompts, locate the element I want to profile, which is this first edge of pavement here on the west side, then locate the reference element. I'll go back here. And then we want to define where do we want this transition or this profile to start and where do we want it to end. So we can just pull this back, and I'll go here to the end. And I'm data pointing. Again, I'm setting the length of the transition. Some of these elements don't even appear. I mean, there's no edge of pavement there, but I'm just defining them either way. We're going to start at a -2, and we're going to end at, let's say, a let's try a -1%. Okay, and then I'll data point. I don't want any vertical offset, and there we go. Now, you'll see that has been placed in my profile. You can see that element now is in my profile, and you can see that it is displayed in 3 dimensions. So there's our proposed edge of pavement. Now, one thing I did, and just the same mistake I made previously, I didn't define a feature definition. But I can select that element, open up the dialog box, and I can redefine a feature definition for that particular element. Okay? Now, in addition to that, what I want you to see is that the data I input is maintained. So if I needed to change something, for example, say the cross slope at the end, if I was really, let's take a look and see. So I'm close. I could modify this in this case if I wanted to. Again, I could lower this down. Maybe that's a 0.75. Oh, that raises us up, so I could make it 1.25. Again, the point here is that that data is accessible and you can make modifications, okay? So we've defined the profile on the western side. Let's follow the same process and modify the profile on the opposite side. So let's look at the profile view for that side. Again, I'm going to use the same command, go through the same process. I'll data point, locate the element we want to profile. The reference element is back to the baseline. Again, I'm just going to pull the cursor. I'm going to go the entire element. So I'm going to assign that. The final profile here, it's a little steeper on the cross slope, so I'm going to input 5% in data point. And now once again, I've placed that element. And I failed to set the feature definition once more. I have problems with that. That's a step I always forget. But now we see that profile based off again of that element that we've defined. And just as before, we can make modifications. We're a little bit below grade when we get to the end point. So let's change that to a 3. And maybe that's not good enough. And there are other ways to do this. So again, I am showing you a way, okay? We could draw this profile specifically if we wanted to. But now we've got both edges of pavement defined vertically. We've got a definition for both edges of pavement, okay? And again, think about where we're going here. The process I am working toward is to define the pavement first, horizontally and vertically, construct the terrain model of that pavement. I'll build the pavement layers from that terrain. Then we'll create shoulders and side slopes around it. Okay? So we have, if we look here in the 3-dimensional model, you see those edge of pavements created. And now we turn our attention to the radius within this area. How do we define the vertical for these arcs? How do we define this transition area? Now, there's a couple of ways. Well, we could do this several ways. What I'm going to do, I'm going to set this first of all so that I don't forget anymore, so that that's taken care of. And I'm going to turn off here. I'm going to turn off the proposed layout file so I can see a little more clearly. Okay, and so now we've got a good view of what we're working on, okay, of our intersection. Now we have to define the vertical for these arcs, okay? Now, how do we do that? Again, let's open up the profile for that element first of all. And we can see here the profile for that particular element. And how do we create that? Now remember, when this was created horizontally, okay, it is connected into two elements. One was the left edge of pavement of the corridor here, the other being the edge of the pavement up here on the north side. What that allows me to do, if I go to the geometry tools, I can open up this command, Quick Profile Transition. And this command allows me to create a vertical transition, whether it's parabolic, or if I push the down arrow, it can be a linear transition. I'm going to use a parabolic transition. I'll data point to accept that, and then I'll select the horizontal element that I want to define vertically, and I'll select that. Now, simply by selecting that, you'll notice that the profile is created, okay, and that profile has been set active. So if I select that element, you'll notice it is the active profile, meaning it is displayed in the 3D model. Okay? Now that works because there are two elements that this arc knows it's associated with, one being the left edge of pavement of my corridor, which has a vertical definition from the roadway template, the roadway corridor, the other being this edge of pavement, which we just defined the vertical definition for. Since it has a vertical definition on either end, I can simply say put a parabolic vertical transition between those two vertical profiles on either end, and that's what we did. Okay? And so that's now displayed in the model. Now, on the opposite side, I'm going to do the same thing, but I want to take just an extra minute and show you something real quick. Now, in this area, I can go a little farther. Well, let's do this. Let's open up this profile so we can see what's going on here. I can project adjacent profiles onto this view of this profile so that I can smooth out the transition. So what I can do is use this command, project extended profile, select the element I want to see the adjacent profiles on, which is this arc, okay, and then I've set that to 15, which is fine. You can change that if you want. It could be whatever you desire there. And then I'm going to data point. You'll see data point once more, and now it extends 15 feet of the adjacent profiles into the profile of my element that I selected. This gives me the opportunity to smooth the transition. I could draw this by hand. I could use some tools, but for time's sake, I'm going to use the quick transition again. We'll do a parabolic transition, select the element we want to define, and then we'll escape. And you can see how it creates a transition between those elements, even taking into account the grade as an incoming grade and outgoing grade as well, okay? And it sets it active so we can see that here also. Now, let's set the definition for our north and our south element. Again, we're going to profile this. Open up the profile for that. I'm going to use a command, profile intersection point, and this is a very useful command, and this allows me to see where elements intersect the profile of another element, okay? So we'll follow the prompts. Bear with me here one second. All right, bear with me. This is tend to be due to my extensive clicking. All right, we'll get right back. All right, let's come right back and continue on. All right, back to our file. So I'm going to profile both the northern element and the southern element. Again, I'm just trying to add that vertical so that as we create the terrain model, I've got both horizontal and vertical definition for those boundaries. And we'll be back shortly. Okay. All right, continuing on. So we're back in our intersection file. And so let's go look. We have the vertical definition for, again, the edges of pavement along the side. And then let's open up the profile model for that northern piece. We can see the existing ground. So we see the existing cross slope of the pavement here. But as I said before, what I want to do is actually show the points of my edge of pavement features in this profile and tie this line to them vertically. So I'm going to go back into the geometry tools, into the vertical geometry tool set, and I'm going to use profile intersection point. Now I want to project, or I want to show these points on that horizontal line. Then I'll select the actual points that I want to see, which are the edge of pavement features. And now I can see those both displayed in that profile. Now I just want to connect the dots, so to speak, so that I add a specific vertical definition to those. So I'm just going to draw here. I'm going to catch the crown as I go. And snap this to the other side, to the other point. And so now we've got that drawn, and I need to complex them together. So I'm just going to complex here. And so I've drawn that vertically. I need to complex them to make sure I get one continuous piece, and then I'll place that in the file. Okay? Now on the south side, we're going to do the same thing. Profile this. So we have that displayed, okay? So that represents that boundary. Let's use the same command. I want to profile the arc. Pick the right points. I want to see that point. I want to see the cross, and I want to see the other point. And again, we're just going to create a quick vertical between those using the vertical tools. And let me draw this in and data point. All right, so we've got that built. Let's complex it together. So I'll go to complex geometry in the vertical and select these elements and data point. And just to be sure, I want to be sure that's active. And now in our model itself, we can see all those elements that have been placed. Now, since we have vertical definition along with horizontal definition for all of these elements, let's go and create, let's go ahead and put these elements together. Well, for time's sake too, I'm going to fast forward a few steps. I could complex chain these elements together. Okay, I could take and use the complex geometry tool here, and I can complex those together. I have to complex both horizontally and vertically. But I could do that just to save time with a further step. However, in order to, again, move forward a little bit more quickly, I'm going to do this without complexing these together, okay? However, I just want you to know that it can be done, and you use the complex tools horizontally and vertically in OpenRoads Designer. Now that we've got these elements in 2D and 3D, let's build the terrain model, okay? So I'm going to go over to the Terrain tab. I'm going to select From Elements. Okay, and I'm going to select these elements to build. This is building the pavement for my intersection. And again, I'm just selecting those, following the prompts. Okay, then I'm going to right-click once I've selected all of them. Define them as boundary elements. This is where you'd pick whether it's a boundary, a break line, a random point, a void, and so forth. We want them to be boundaries, so I'll data point, leave the edge method at max triangle leg length, side length should be 0, and I'll data point. And now I've built the pavement for my intersection. Okay? Now, again, for time's sake, I want to show you some of the key elements associated with building an intersection or a driveway. So number one, we defined the horizontal definition of the pavement. Okay? We defined the vertical definition for the pavement. Okay? Understand how that goes. Now we're going to actually construct the model, meaning I'm going to add depth to this model. So if we look at this model right now, it's just a terrain. You can see the triangles on top. We could change the display to look at the contours if we wanted to, but it's just a terrain sitting on top. Now, again, to really build a model, I'm going to use surface templates to do that. So I'm going to go to Model Detailing, select Apply Surface Template. Okay. Now, before I do that, let me go and open up the proper template library for our example. So before I get to surface templates, I want to go to corridors, open up the template library, and this will be the template library contained in your data set. And we'll browse out into session 4 and open up the template library, Highway 72 templates.itl. Again, this is what you do with your data set to get the right templates available for what we're doing here. Okay? Now, so here we are. We have our templates available to us, and there are some templates here we're going to use in just a second for the shoulders and the edges. Now, back to applying a surface template, Model Detailing, apply the surface template. I'm going to follow the prompts here. Select the terrain model. I don't care about a boundary. Now here I pick the actual template that I want to use as my build-up for my pavement. There's actually surface templates contained here. I'm going to select Asphalt Pavement, click OK, and then data point to accept that. Then I'm prompted as a boundary of like, okay, is this where you want to place this surface template? I'll data point to accept that selection. And so now the intersection has depth to it. I actually have a pavement section within the model. So I really have an intersection model at this point. Okay? And now, if we continue on, let's look at, and I'm only going to do one side here, again, just for time's sake. But I'll show you it's the same process from one side to the other. Okay? So let's take a look at this side along the south here. So let me pull the model over here. Now we need to implement the shoulders and the side slopes along our intersection. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use linear templates. So to do that, I can select Apply Linear Template. I'm going to apply this. Again, I'm going to do this in pieces because I didn't complex these elements together. But it's the same steps. Again, I want to make sure you see the major steps. I'll push the Alt key and the down arrow to select the template that I want to use here. Okay, and that template is this template here, asphalt shoulder plus an end condition. So I'll say OK to that. Then I'll data point to select that template selection. And I want to run this template along that element from the starting station. And I'm just going to go ahead and run it. I'll just run it all the way to the end, again, just for simplicity's sake. So we'll run this to the end of that element. I'll data point to accept it. I can select which side of the element I want to place the template on. So I'll be sure to move my cursor to the appropriate side and data point to accept those default settings. And so now, let's pull this out of the way. You can see I've placed my linear template. You can see it going around the slope there, okay? Now, rotate the view around. I got a bit of a gap there that I could go back to my corridor. Remember, I didn't snap. I guessed at that spacing. I could go back to my corridor, move that key station, and really close that gap. But we can see now our shoulder's been placed, so that's great. Now, importantly here, if I want to taper that out, if I want to taper that shoulder out, I can use parametric constraints. The width of this shoulder is definable outside the template. So I'm going to select the corridor, go here to parametric constraints. I want this to go from the beginning, of course, unto the end. So I'll push the Alt key, I'll data point, shoulder width right, that's the constraint label on that. It's going to start out 6 feet wide down here, meaning it's 6 feet wide at the main line. And I want that to taper out to a 0.01. The 0.01 is because the template has some constraints inside of it. I can't go straight to 0. I can only go to 0.01 based off those constraints. And I'll data point to accept that. So now we just tapered that shoulder into our roadway intersection. And I can follow on and I can continue now, and I can place an additional end condition using linear templates along the next section. So I'm just going to select the element this time, apply a linear template, and I bet I have, hold up, let's check this, bear with me here, make sure the 3D is off. Make sure the 3D model is off. So I'm selecting those geometric elements properly. Select the element, apply the linear template. It's okay. It works. We'll go with it. And then select the appropriate side slope, which I'm just going to use a simple side slope. And then we'll data point through. We'll start at station. Let's do end. Select the point where we want to begin here. Let's select the right place. Okay, sorry, my fault on the clicking. There's our template we want to use. Let's go station it from here. And then let's go to the end station here. I'll data point to accept it. Be sure to select the proper side. And then again, we data point and data point through to process it. Now in this case, you'll notice this is a very simple end condition, and the width needs to be modified. I can make modifications to it by just editing the template drop itself. So I'll select the graphic, purple dashed line that represents the template drop, and then I'll make a modification to that shoulder. I'll just widen that out to 3, say OK to that, and then we'll see that modification in the model. Okay, so with that, we can see the width, or at least that side of the intersection is now complete. Now, one thing important to note here is if at this point I need to make modifications. So I've built this intersection up. I've modeled the shoulders. I've modeled the other pieces and parts along with it, the terrain and so forth. And you'll notice there's a bit of a tight turn here as we come in here. And so I can make modifications later on. So if I select that edge of pavement feature, and you'll notice it's carrying that 12-foot offset as it comes into this arc. But let's say I want to open this up a little bit. I can select that element, okay? And I need to select the interval element, which I've selected there. And I can modify that. So I need to select it near the end, more or less the invisible section. And let's say we're going to change that to 16 because we want to, again, open up that intersection for larger vehicles. Okay? Now, that broke my terrain, which based off of, I'd have to correct that. But I can make that modification geometrically and have it ripple throughout the intersection. Okay? So if we put that piece back, so I've snapped to something incorrectly while I'm doing this live. But I wanted to make that point that these elements can be updated, base geometric elements can be updated as you work through it, okay? Now, we're getting close to the hour, but let's take a look at our crossover. So let me reference in our layout file. The crossover actually will be constructed in a similar method using similar tools and similar techniques as the intersection. Number one, geometrically, we need to lay this out in horizontal space. And you can see we've already created this crossover horizontally. You see the elements here. They've already been defined vertically as well. We can see them in the 3D model. So knowing that, we can build this crossover pavement section based off of creating a terrain, then adding a surface template if we want, and then defining the shoulders and the side slopes. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a terrain from these elements. And we'll call this terrain crossover. These will all be boundary elements, and then I'm just select them. And I'm selecting them in the 2D view. And they have a vertical definitions we can see here. Then I'll right-click, define them as boundary elements. I'll left click, and then left click once more. And so now we have constructed that crossover area within our corridor or within our model. Just as before, now we can assign a surface template to that if we want. So I can go to Model Template, Model Detailing, apply a surface template. I can select the terrain model, follow the prompts. We're going to use the same asphalt pavement as our crossover. Again, you could vary this if you wanted, and then I'll data point to accept the solution. So now we have that crossover area has been modeled. The pavement area of that has been modeled. We can see that here. And now we need to add in, fill in the area with the shoulder, and how are we going to tie this down to our ditch area? So let's take a look at doing that. We can use linear templates just as we did previously. So I'm going to apply a linear template. Okay, select the proper template. So I'll browse into my template library. We're going to select this inside EOP shoulder. And we'll go through that. Let's data point to accept it. I'm going to push the Alt key because I want to apply this all the way around the actual element. I'll data point, and then we'll hold to the end station. Again, I've locked that to the end station. Data point. And remember, I can pick the proper side, so be sure the cursor is in the right place so that we apply the template to the right area. And then I'll data point to create that model. Okay? All right. So now, if we take a look, we can see, oh, let's go back. Zoom in. We can see that area. We can take a look. So we've got now, we've got the shoulders. We could make modifications to these shoulders if we wanted to. But again, for time's sake, originally I was going to refine these a little, but we'll leave them as they are. And now, how do I tie these down? Okay, let's turn on the corridor in the plan or the first view. So I'll go back to home. Let's turn on the corridor here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to create just a quick horizontal element. And I'm going to define a profile along this section of the ditch to incorporate in a what we kind of have called a mini terrain to fill in this area. So using this, and I might need to edit that template. I'm looking at the offsets here. Let's edit this just a little. So after placement, let's make that a 4 foot. And you'll see the model update. All right, so we got a little bit better on our width. Okay, that looks a little better. I can modify the cross slope too, or the slope on that element. So we could go back in. Rather than a 2%, let's make that a -6. Okay, and again, I could continue to refine it if I wanted. Now, back to tying this together. In the plan view, I'm going to create, remember, 2D geometry and 3D geometry. I'm going to take advantage of that in order to fill in this area. I'm going to create a 2D line, and I'm going to create that from this end of the top of the ditch, and I'll draw this over to the top of the ditch on the other side. All right, now this is cool stuff. How to take advantage of these tools. And think about how to model in different ways. So we know that 2D element is now created. I'm going to select it and open up the profile window. So let's display the profile along that horizontal element. Okay, now how do I see that ditch within this view? There are a couple ways to do it, but one of the most useful, I think, and one of the most creative ways that allows you to do all sorts of things in a profile is to use this. We can actually show the model in the profile view dynamically. So I'm going to use Create 3D Cut, and I'm going to just slice this in this area here where I happen to be looking. And now you'll see I can actually see the model represented based off of those graphical elements, or those boundaries that I've defined. And so I can just draw that in. I can refresh the view if I need to make modifications to it. So now I've shown that view in my cross section, but I need a vertical definition, okay? Now I could, I'm just going to draw this, okay? I'm going to draw this right over the top. I'm going to use that as a guide to create a vertical. Now the feature definition here, I'm going to leave it as is just for time's sake. But I'm really just drawing in what will be the vertical elements that define the boundary of this terrain model. And those vertical elements match the flow line of this median ditch. Okay? Now, I can leave that, or in this case, to kind of simplify the view, I'm going to remove it. And I need to complex these together just to make sure they're one element. So now I have a single element. Now that element needs to be set active. So I'm going to select it and set it as the active profile for that horizontal line that I created. You can actually see that line in the model now. Okay, it's there. Now how do I build a terrain model out of that? And again, what I'm doing here is I'm simply going to create a terrain model with a boundary here from the top of the bank down to the flow line or across the cross section of this ditch. So I'll go back into the terrain modeling tools. I'll select from elements, just as we did before. I'm going to select those elements from my file. Okay, so if we're looking in here, I'm going to select, that's the edge of shoulder. From elements. Bear with me. Okay, I can actually pick it into 3D view. That's much simpler. Let's do that. And then I can pick that same element here. Then I'm going to right-click, select those as boundary elements, and then I'll data point and data point through the process. And so now doing that workflow, that has allowed me to create a smooth transition in that area between the shoulders of the crossover and the median ditch, okay? And so we took advantage of some techniques and some really cool tools there in order to create that transition, okay? Now, I could apply a surface template to this. I could make it green and green grass and so forth, okay? But for time's sake, we're a few minutes past the hour, so we're going to stop there. I covered all of the major components of going through creating an intersection or a driveway, or in this case, a median crossover. The key components here are 2D geometry, create the 3D geometry, the profile, the 2D geometry, and there's multiple methods to do that. Think about modeling the pavement first, so we create a terrain model of that intersection or that crossover or that lots of elements, it could be lots of things, and then constructing the intersection from that, okay? From there, once that surface is created, we can apply a surface template. And apply that surface template allows us to put depth onto that template, and allows us again to build a real model. And then we can use we actually use corridors or linear templates to end up building the side slopes around it. And then finally, in the median, in this small area, we use just a total freestyle technique, meaning I created a horizontal that I knew I needed, profiled it based off of a corridor now. There's no terrain model involved in this workflow, and then created the triangles to close in that gap with a nice smooth transition. Okay? Now, there are a couple things here I didn't do. I didn't add this terrain or this profile or this crown of the road into this, again, just for time's sake, but we could do that as well.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.